The office was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. The gentle hum of printers and soft clicks of keyboards filled the air like white noise. Calming. Familiar. Elise Harper walked through the glass doors of Beckett and Stroud Consulting with her usual sense of poise. A stack of client folders was neatly cradled in her arm, her blazer pressed, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. She didn't notice the way eyes shifted as she passed. The curious glance from Olivia at the front desk, the nervous half-smile from Marcus in accounting. Elise moved as she always had, head high, efficient, unknowingly walking toward a moment that would split her life into before and after. At 9:03 a.m., her office phone rang. "Miss Harper," said the voice of Margaret Sloan, the head of Human Resources. "Could you please come to Conference Room B? Bring nothing with you." A pause. "Now?" "Yes, Elise. Now." There was no urgency in the voice, but something about the formality chilled her. She placed the folders gently on her desk, smoothed the front of her skirt, and walked down the corridor. She didn't know it yet, but this short walk would replay in her mind for weeks to come. Inside the glass-paneled room sat 3 people. Margaret Sloan, Thomas Reed, the company's lead legal advisor, and Dale Stroud himself, one of the 2 founding partners. Elise's stomach dipped. They weren't smiling. They didn't offer her coffee. This wasn't a meeting. It was a firing squad. "Elise," Margaret began. Her tone was clipped, professional. "We'll be brief." Elise sat down slowly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Margaret continued. "After a thorough internal review, it's come to our attention that you intervened in the promotion process of Jeremy Clark, manipulating certain procedural elements to influence the final decision." Elise blinked. For a moment, she didn't understand what she was hearing. Her mind clung to the words like fragments of a storm. Intervened. Manipulating. Influence. "We have email records, calendar access logs, and testimonial evidence that show you orchestrated an informal campaign to support Mr. Clark, including, but not limited to, redirecting feedback forms and withholding comparative performance data from the final review panel." Elise opened her mouth, her voice catching before sound could form. She wanted to explain, to tell them why, but Margaret didn't stop. "Regardless of your intent, this constitutes a serious breach of ethical conduct. We are terminating your employment effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building. Your severance details will be emailed to you. You are no longer permitted to access your work systems." Elise felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Dale Stroud leaned forward slightly, his voice softer than Margaret's, but no less final. "Elise," he said, "we want you to know that this decision was not made lightly. You've been an asset to this company for 3 years, but this undermines everything we stand for." Her hands were shaking now. "Mr. Stroud, if I could just—" "You'll have a chance to respond in your exit paperwork," Margaret said firmly. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. The elevator ride down was silent. Elise held a white envelope with her name typed on the front, her official termination letter. Her badge no longer worked. Security had been called, though they kept a respectful distance. It was protocol. No scene, no drama, just silence and shame. She exited the building and stood on the sidewalk, stunned. The city moved around her as if nothing had happened. Cabs honked. Phones rang. People walked by in coats and earbuds and coffees, never once looking at her. Elise sat on a bench across the street and stared up at the windows of Beckett and Stroud. Her world. Her second home. And now, the place where everything had fallen apart. A soft vibration in her purse pulled her from the fog. A text. Jeremy Clark. "I just heard. Elise. I'm so sorry." She stared at the message. Her stomach churned, her chest ached. She didn't reply. 3 hours later, Elise sat in her apartment, surrounded by the stillness of home. A place that had once felt safe. Now it felt like a cell. Her phone buzzed again, calls from coworkers, voicemails from HR. She silenced it and curled into her couch, knees drawn to her chest. The injustice cut deep, not because she believed she'd done nothing wrong, but because no one asked why she did it. No one wanted the story. Months ago, Jeremy had come to her in tears, his hands trembling, his voice cracking. Anna, his wife, had been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. The medical bills had piled high, and their insurance was barely covering the basics. He was desperate, broken. "I need this promotion, Elise," he had said. "Without it, I don't know how we'll make it through the year." She hadn't promised anything, but she'd watched Jeremy work late, show up early, skip lunch to finish projects. She believed in him, not just because of sympathy, but because he was good, capable, worthy. So she'd helped, quietly, nudged forms, highlighted strengths, suppressed weaker evaluations. She thought she was doing something good, something right. Now she was unemployed, branded unethical, and completely alone. That night, Elise didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The phrase "serious ethical breach" echoed in her mind like a gavel. She thought of Jeremy, of Anna, of all the small moments that led to this reckoning. In her heart, she still wasn't sure whether she'd made the right decision. But she knew one thing. She wasn't the villain they'd painted her to be. She had made a mistake, yes, but it had come from the purest place inside her. And maybe, somehow, that mattered. As the sun crept in through the blinds, Elise whispered aloud to herself, "This isn't the end." It didn't feel like strength, but it was a beginning. The next morning began not with the usual alarm, but with silence. Elise lay awake long before dawn, her eyes dry from a night without sleep. Her mind drifted back to every hallway conversation, every hesitant glance from co-workers that now took on a new meaning. Had they known? Had someone talked? Was she ever truly trusted? She got out of bed slowly, as if testing whether the world outside still moved at the same pace without her in it. Coffee felt pointless. Breakfast, absurd. Her routine, so carefully constructed over years, was shattered. The clean lines of structure in her life had been redrawn with jagged edges. She stared at the refrigerator, its surface still adorned with the thank you note from Jeremy and Anna from months ago. A photograph, too. Anna, bald from chemo but smiling, standing beside Jeremy at a benefit gala. Elise had attended as their guest. She had even brought flowers. Now the sight of it turned her stomach. She plucked the photo down, her fingers trembling. What had felt like kindness then now seemed like betrayal, of the company, of herself. She hadn't meant to break the rules, but she had. And now, she was left with the wreckage. By midday, the calls started coming again. First, Olivia from reception. "Hey, Elise, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about what happened. I had no idea. None of us did. I think it's awful." Elise thanked her quietly, not sure what else to say. Then a voicemail from her mother. "Elise, honey, I heard from Aunt Marianne. What happened at work? Call me. Please, we're worried." She didn't call back. Not yet. Around 3 p.m., Elise ventured outside. The world didn't stop for her unraveling. The streets were alive. Honking horns, food trucks lining the block, joggers weaving between tourists. But Elise moved like a ghost, drifting without direction, her thoughts loud against the muffled din of city life. She ended up at Milford Park, a small green space she used to visit on lunch breaks. She sat on a bench beneath the large elm tree, where she had once read books in the shade, away from deadlines and emails. She closed her eyes. Her mind took her back to the decision, the first small step in her downfall. It had started with a spreadsheet. She had noticed that Jeremy's evaluation wasn't being given fair weight in comparison to the others. She had seen gaps, missed metrics, an overlooked commendation he'd received from a senior consultant. So she had reorganized the file, cleaned it up, highlighted what she thought they needed to see. She hadn't lied. Not exactly. She'd simply guided. Then came the emails. She had forgotten to forward the full performance report of another candidate, a man who had coasted through his quarter. Elise hadn't done it out of malice. She simply believed Jeremy deserved the chance more. The others had time. Jeremy didn't. And now, the company didn't want context. Just consequences. A sudden voice broke her thoughts. "You look like someone who's having a really bad day." Elise opened her eyes to see a man, middle-aged, in a paint-stained hoodie and jeans, smiling gently as he walked past with a leashed dog. The Labradoodle sniffed near her feet, wagging its tail. She gave a small smile, her voice hoarse. "You could say that." He nodded, his expression kind. "Well, don't let it win, whatever it is." He moved on, and Elise sat with those words. Don't let it win. That night, she finally opened the email from HR. The official statement, legal language, confidentiality clauses, terms of her severance, an attached file marked Final Documentation. She clicked through it numbly, until she reached the section that listed the specific infractions. One stood out: Violation of Corporate Ethics Code 4.2. Undue influence on internal decision processes for personal or emotional gain. Personal or emotional gain. The words burned. She hadn't gained anything. She had lost. She had tried to help someone else. Was that really wrong? But as much as it pained her, Elise also knew. The company's integrity mattered. Systems had to be trusted. Even if a process was flawed, circumventing it was dangerous. Because what if someone less deserving had benefited? What if every employee started nudging outcomes? She had crossed a line. Good intentions or not. Later that evening, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jeremy. Jeremy Clark. "Elise, please, let me talk to them. This isn't fair to you." Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She typed, erased, typed again. "Elise, it's done. You have enough to worry about. Take care of Anna." She didn't wait for a response. She set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling again. This time, a tear slid down her cheek. Not from guilt, but from the ache of being misunderstood, of being cast as something she wasn't. It hurt because they didn't know her, because they didn't ask. But she knew. And somehow that had to be enough. Tomorrow, she would start figuring out what came next. Because this couldn't be how her story ended. Not here. Not like this. Elise sat at her kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood as the morning sun slid across it. It had been 3 days since her firing, and the world still looked the same. Blue skies, quiet streets, emails in her inbox. But she had changed. It was like being a ghost in her own life. Everything familiar felt foreign now. Her laptop sat open, untouched. The job boards blurred together. Administrative coordinator, executive assistant, operations associate. Every listing reminded her of what she used to be: reliable, respected, trusted. But those words didn't belong to her anymore. Not now. She closed the screen and pulled out a notebook instead. Something in her craved paper, something she could touch, where words didn't vanish with a click. She wrote just one sentence. "I tried to help, and it broke me." The words sat heavy on the page. That afternoon, she received a message from Jeremy's wife, Anna. It was short, polite, and heartbreakingly kind. Anna Clark. "Hi, Elise. I just wanted to say thank you. Jeremy told me what you did. I know it cost you everything. but you gave us hope when we were losing it. I'll never forget that. Please know. You made a difference. I'm so sorry." Elise read the message over and over, her throat tightening. The words were gentle, sincere. They didn't erase the consequences, but they reminded her of something she had started to forget. She had made a difference. Not on a spreadsheet or a quarterly report, but in a life, in a family. She remembered the day Jeremy had come to her. How worn he looked, like a man breaking quietly under the weight of fear. "I can't lose her," he had said, voice cracking. "I just need a little more time. A little more money. Please, Elise. I don't know what else to do." They had been sitting in the break room. Rain tapped the windows. He hadn't even tried to hide the tears. And Elise, with all her order and control, had felt that helplessness sink into her chest. She had known it wasn't her job. It wasn't her place. But it had felt so human to care. And so she had made the choice. She had taken her knowledge of the promotion system, her reputation, her quiet influence among department heads, and had used it. Not boldly, not with deception, but with intent. She drafted emails with strategic wording, reorganized reports subtly to highlight Jeremy's strengths. She called in a favor with one senior manager, pushing for a faster review. And it worked. Jeremy got the promotion. Anna began a more aggressive round of treatment. They could finally afford the medications and visits they had been putting off. At the time, Elise had felt relief. No guilt, no fear. Just a quiet pride, like she had bent the universe a little toward compassion. But now, with everything lost, she wasn't so sure. The following day, Elise met with an old friend, Nora Caldwell. They had once worked together at Beckett and Stroud, but Nora had left to join a nonprofit downtown. She had texted Elise that morning, insisting they meet for coffee. Elise hesitated. The thought of seeing someone, really seeing someone, felt exhausting. But she went anyway. The cafe was quiet, tucked between an art gallery and a florist. Nora was already seated, her dark curls pinned back, a steaming mug in her hands. "Elise," she said warmly, standing to hug her. "God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe it." "I can," Elise said with a tired smile, sitting down. "I knew it would come out eventually. I just didn't think it would end like this." Nora leaned forward. "Jeremy told me everything, what you did for them. Elise, you were trying to save someone. That matters." "It doesn't matter to the company," Elise murmured. "They didn't even ask for context. Just facts, emails, policy violations." Nora sighed. "That's how companies protect themselves. But this? What you did, it was flawed, yes, but it was human. It wasn't selfish. It wasn't malicious." Elise stared into her cup. "Maybe, but it was dishonest. And I keep asking myself, if I had to do it again, would I?" There was silence. Then Nora said, "I think the harder question is, how would you do it again?" Elise looked up. "I mean," Nora continued, "could you have helped in a way that didn't compromise yourself? Didn't break the rules? Maybe you felt cornered. Maybe you thought bending the system was the only option. But I don't believe for a second you would have done it if you saw another way." Elise nodded slowly. That was the truth, wasn't it? It hadn't been about ambition or defiance. It had been desperation. Their desperation, bleeding into hers. She had wanted to do good. But she hadn't paused to ask, at what cost? When Elise returned home, she opened her laptop again. Not to search for jobs, but to write. She wrote everything. The moment Jeremy came to her. The night she stayed late revising his review files. The feeling of handing in that final stack of papers, knowing she had quietly tilted the scale. She wrote not to justify, but to remember. Because somewhere in her, She knew this story wasn't just about a mistake. It was about her heart, about how deeply she felt things others ignored. She had misplaced her kindness, not in giving it, but in giving it without boundaries. And now, she would learn how to give it better. The memory of Jeremy's voice haunted Elise like a song she couldn't turn off. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. The tremble, the cracking of a man usually composed, now unraveling in a quiet corner of a high-rise office. It had been 5 months ago, just after lunch on a Wednesday. Elise had returned to her desk to find Jeremy pacing near her door. He was holding a file, but his eyes were glassy and unfocused. She had always liked Jeremy, soft-spoken, diligent, not the kind of employee who drew attention. But that day, he looked like a man holding a secret too heavy to carry alone. "Elise," he said, "do you have a minute?" She nodded and gestured for him to step inside. She closed the door behind them. He sat, then stood, then sat again, his fingers clasping and unclasping as if he were holding invisible shards. She waited, giving him the space to speak. Then finally he exhaled and said, "Anna's sick." The words landed like a stone. "She has lymphoma. Stage 4. The doctors say there's still hope, but the treatments are expensive. We've burned through our savings, our insurance. It's garbage." He paused to swipe at his eyes. "I'm not asking for charity," he added quickly. "I'm not even sure why I'm here. I'm scared. I don't know what else to do." Elise felt something twist inside her. She knew what it was like to feel powerless. Years ago, her younger sister had needed emergency surgery after a car accident. Their family insurance had barely covered the basics. Elise had worked overtime, skipped meals, borrowed from friends just to keep things afloat. She knew that particular flavor of desperation. It never left you. Not really. "Have you talked to HR?" she asked gently. Jeremy shook his head. "They offered a payment plan and a brochure. That's it." Silence hung between them. Then Jeremy leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's a promotion coming up. Senior analyst. I qualify. I have the credentials, the time, the reviews. But I've been overlooked twice. I think they're going to choose someone else. Someone with louder opinions or a bigger lunch crowd." He looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed but focused. "You know how this place works, Elise. You see everything. You know the people who make the calls, the ones who whisper before the meetings. If there's anything you can do, anything at all." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. In the following days, Elise struggled with the weight of his request. He hadn't asked her to break rules, not directly, but it was there, underneath everything. The hope that she could use her influence, her knowledge, her proximity to power, to help him win a battle he couldn't fight alone. She watched him at work, how he stayed late, took notes diligently, offered help to new hires without being asked. He wasn't extraordinary, but he was consistent and kind. That counted for something, or at least Elise had thought so. Still, there was no denying it. He wasn't the top performer. Another candidate, Alyssa Vaughn, had stronger numbers. Elise had liked her too. Ambitious, sharp. But in her gut, she felt something different about Jeremy's need. It wasn't ambition. It was survival. Her first step was small. She casually mentioned Jeremy's name in a conversation with the director of operations, citing his reliability. Later that week, she removed an outdated comment from his evaluation file, one that had been addressed and resolved, but still sat there like a bruise. Then came the bigger choice. Alyssa's final performance metrics arrived on Elise's desk one Friday. It was her job to compile them for the executive review packet. Elise opened the folder. Her heart thudded in her chest. She stared at the pages. Everything in her training, in her role, told her what she was supposed to do. But Jeremy's voice echoed again. "I don't know what else to do." She hesitated, And then she slipped Alyssa's updated metrics into a separate folder marked Pending Review and submitted the packet without them. It was wrong. She knew that. But it was also the moment that sealed Jeremy's promotion and her fate. 3 weeks later, Jeremy received the call. He got the promotion. He hugged Elise in the hallway, thanked her with tears in his eyes. "You believed in me," he whispered. "I'll never forget this." He never knew exactly what she did. Not until much later. Now, sitting at her kitchen table months after that moment, Elise felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. She hadn't acted for glory. No one even knew. There was no personal gain. Just the soft satisfaction of doing something meaningful, of choosing mercy over metrics. But the world, she was learning, didn't always reward mercy. Especially not in business. And what haunted her most wasn't the choice she made. It was how easy it had felt at the time. She had justified every step. She had told herself she was simply leveling a flawed playing field, that compassion could be more important than rules. But now, with her name stripped from the company roster and her reputation in question, Elise wondered if she had misunderstood the true cost of that decision. Later that night, she wrote again in her notebook. "Desperation makes heroes out of fools. And I was both." Then beneath it, "But if I had to choose between a spotless record and helping someone breathe a little easier, I don't know. I still don't know." The office had been cold that day, not in temperature but in tone. Elise remembered the way people had spoken in clipped phrases, how meetings ended quicker than usual, and how the air carried a charge, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for something to drop. The senior analyst promotion announcement was scheduled for 3 p.m. Elise had spent the morning organizing the final presentation files for the decision panel. She had triple-checked every form, scrubbed duplicate entries, and prepared performance graphs. Her desk, always neat, was pristine. But inside, she was unraveling. Alyssa Vaughn's folder still sat in the locked bottom drawer of her desk. It was labeled Pending. Q2 metrics, just as she had marked it weeks earlier. Inside were the numbers. Accurate, clean, and excellent. Numbers that would have almost certainly secured Alyssa the promotion, had they been submitted in time. Instead, Elise had left them out. She had told herself that someone else would catch it. That it wasn't her job to double-check every department's paperwork. She had created just enough distance between her decision and the outcome that she could pretend her hands were still clean. But they weren't. When the clock struck 3 p.m., Elise stood at the back of the executive conference room, hands folded, lips pressed in a neutral line. She watched as Jeremy was announced as the new senior analyst. There was polite applause, a few congratulations, and 1 or 2 disappointed glances exchanged between team leaders. Alyssa sat silent, nodding respectfully, her face unreadable. Elise watched Jeremy shake hands with Mr. Stroud, his face glowing with relief. He looked over at Elise and mouthed, "Thank you." Her stomach twisted. After the meeting, Jeremy pulled her aside in the hallway, his voice low and thick with emotion. "I don't know how to say this, Elise. You saved us. Anna's already booked her next round of treatment. We can finally stop worrying about losing the house." Elise smiled weakly, forcing herself to believe this was worth it. "That's what matters," she said. "You did the work, Jeremy. You deserve the chance." But as he walked away, something inside her cracked. Because that wasn't the whole truth. He did deserve the chance. But someone else had deserved it more. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, replaying everything. Jeremy's tearful plea, the choice to withhold Alyssa's folder, the executive meeting, the applause. The justification she'd built around it began to erode in the quiet. She had helped someone, but she had hurt someone else in the process. That was the cost she hadn't calculated. The next day, Alyssa stopped by her desk. "Hey," she said, her voice as casual as ever. Do you know if my Q2 metrics ever made it into the final packet? I had submitted them directly to the department head, but I never got confirmation. Elise froze. I'm not sure, she lied, her mouth dry. You might want to follow up with Mark in performance. I think he compiled the final submission. Alyssa smiled faintly. Will do. Just seems strange, you know? I was tracking ahead all quarter. I really thought I had it. Then, with a shrug, she walked away. Elise sat motionless, heart pounding. The lie felt sharp in her throat. Weeks passed. The company moved on. Jeremy adjusted to his new role, and Elise told herself to breathe. But the tension inside her didn't ease. She avoided eye contact with Alyssa. She skipped optional meetings. Her joy at work dimmed into quiet obligation. Then one day, she was summoned to HR. A compliance review had flagged inconsistencies. Someone had noticed a missing evaluation. And Alyssa had asked the right questions to the right people. An internal investigation was launched. Elise was asked to submit her version of events. She considered denying everything. But the weight was too heavy now. The guilt had sunk too deep. She confessed. She didn't name Jeremy. She didn't shift the blame. She simply said, I made a judgment call. I believed one of our employees needed help. I used my influence to make that happen. And I understand now that I crossed a line. The HR director didn't respond. She simply closed the folder and nodded. We'll be in touch. 2 days later, she was fired. No appeal, no second chances. And now, sitting in her apartment weeks later, Elise understood the full scale of what she had done. She had believed that kindness alone justified bending the rules, that good intentions could shield her from consequences. But kindness without boundaries wasn't heroism. It was recklessness. She had robbed Alyssa of a fair shot. She had broken the trust of her team, and she had betrayed her own values, ones that once guided her with such clarity. Still, she didn't regret helping Jeremy. What she regretted was how she did it. She should have spoken up, advocated openly, found another way. But she had chosen the quiet path, the easy path, the one that left no fingerprints until it left scars. That night, Elise opened her journal again. She wrote slowly, "A moment of compassion cost me everything. But hiding it cost me more." And underneath, "Next time, I speak, even if it's harder, even if I'm afraid." Before Elise's fall, the office of Beckett and Stroud had been a place of quiet rhythm, a space where efficiency met elegance, where people nodded in passing but rarely asked personal questions. Elise thrived in that structure. She liked knowing what was expected. She liked being the person others trusted to handle the small things that no one else noticed. But after Jeremy's promotion, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A pause in conversation when she entered the break room. A question asked twice, even though she'd already answered it. A glance exchanged between two analysts after she walked by. Then came the whispers. "Funny how he jumped ahead so fast. I thought Alyssa was a lock. You think Elise had anything to do with it?" No one accused her directly. No one sent a memo or called her out in a meeting. But the doubt began to grow, like ink in water, spreading silently through corners, glances, and half-spoken sentences. Elise felt it, like static on her skin. The truth was that the office had always run on unspoken power. It wasn't just about what you did, but how people perceived what you did. And perception had turned against her. The day after the compliance review was announced, Elise was excluded from a planning session she had been organizing for weeks. When she asked her manager, Linda, why she hadn't been invited, the answer came with a tight smile. "We just figured you might need a breather this week, Elise, given everything going on." That was the first time it had been said out loud. Everything going on. Not the investigation. Not the situation. Just a vague cloud of trouble that everyone acknowledged, but no one dared name directly. Later, in the copy room, she overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for her. "I mean, I like Elise," someone whispered. "But what if she's been doing this kind of thing for years and we never noticed?" The second voice hesitated. "I don't know. I just think, when people start bending rules, where does it stop?" Elise didn't interrupt. She didn't confront. She stood behind the half-closed door, clutching a stack of printed memos, her heart sinking deeper into her stomach. Alyssa avoided her. Not coldly. Just enough to make the silence louder than any confrontation. They passed each other in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the elevator. But Alyssa's eyes never met hers. She spoke to others around Elise, but never to her directly again. That was what hurt the most. Because Alyssa had been a friend, not a close one, but a real one. They had exchanged books, shared lunch stories, even joked about the firm's endless spreadsheets. Alyssa had trusted her, and Elise had betrayed that trust. The worst moment came during a staff meeting 2 days before her termination. The HR director stood at the front of the room, reviewing updated ethics guidelines. Elise sat in the second row, her hands folded in her lap. "These reminders are standard," the director said, "but it's important that we all hold ourselves to the highest standard of integrity. Even small decisions can have lasting impact on teams, on careers, and on our company's reputation." She didn't look at Elise. No one did, but the air was heavy with the weight of implication. When the meeting ended, people gathered their things quickly. A few nodded to her, awkward and brief. Others didn't look at her at all. Elise walked slowly back to her desk, where a pink envelope sat waiting. Inside was the notice: termination effective Friday. No further discussion, no final meeting, no goodbye. She packed her things quietly that afternoon, before the official deadline. There was no dramatic exit. No tears or slamming of doors. Just a cardboard box filled with framed photos, old notebooks, and one coffee mug with a faded quote: "Be the kind voice in the room." As she stepped into the elevator one last time, the city skyline stared back at her through the glass. She didn't cry, but she did feel hollow. Like someone had carved out the part of her that believed in goodness without consequence. That night, Elise went for a long walk. She wandered through downtown, past food trucks and glowing storefronts, past couples laughing in cafes and people rushing home from work. The world looked normal, untouched, but inside her, everything was different. She sat on a bench by the river. The wind blew her hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear, watching the water ripple in the streetlights. Then slowly, she spoke out loud. Just once. "I did the wrong thing. For the right reasons." The sentence floated in the air. And for the first time since she was fired, she believed it fully. She had made a mistake. She had crossed a line. And the whispers in the office, the judgment, the silence, had been painful. But they didn't define her. Because deep down, Elise still believed in kindness. She still believed that helping people mattered. She just needed to learn how to do it the right way. Without secrets, without shortcuts, without shame. The first week after Elise's termination passed in slow motion. She moved through her days as if underwater, quiet, muted, disconnected. Her inbox remained silent, her phone screen blank. No calls, no texts, no check-ins from people she had once eaten lunch with every day. Only Jeremy had reached out again. But this time, his messages went unanswered. Not because Elise was angry at him. She wasn't. She couldn't be. He had asked for help, and she had freely given it. What hurt was how quickly her life had unraveled, while his continued to move forward, rising on the very thing that had destroyed hers. On the sixth night, Elise received a knock at her door. When she opened it, she didn't expect to see Jeremy standing there, holding a paper bag of takeout in one hand and guilt written across every line of his face. "Elise," he said quietly. "I didn't know where else to go." She stepped aside, wordlessly, and let him in. They sat in silence at her kitchen table, 2 steaming boxes of Thai food untouched between them. "I tried to fix it," Jeremy said eventually. "I went to HR. I told them everything, that I asked you to help, that I was the one who put you in that position." Elise looked at him, eyebrows raised. "And?" "They listened, took notes, told me it wouldn't change anything, that you were the one who acted, that good intentions don't excuse ethical violations." Elise nodded. "They're not wrong." Jeremy leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "God, Elise, I'm so sorry. I never thought it would go that far. Anna was so sick. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was drowning. And then you threw me a rope." She exhaled, slowly. "And I tied it around my own neck." He flinched. "I don't regret helping you," she added, her voice gentler now. "But I do regret how I did it. I should have found another way. I should have spoken up, asked for a formal review, asked someone to look deeper. Instead, I cut corners. I kept it quiet." "You were trying to protect me." "No," she said softly. "I was trying to protect the outcome." Jeremy stayed for an hour. They talked, not about Beckett and Stroud, but about Anna's progress, the new treatment schedule, the hospital across town that had finally accepted her into a clinical trial. There was a light in his voice now, one Elise hadn't heard before. When he left, he hesitated at the door. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No," Elise said honestly, "but I'm learning not to hate myself either." He nodded, his eyes misting. "I hope someday I can pay this forward. The way you helped us. It saved her. It saved me." "Then make sure it means something," she replied. The next morning, Elise woke to find a letter in her inbox. It was from Alyssa. She stared at the subject line for a full minute before clicking it. Subject: about what happened. "Elise, I wasn't going to reach out. I didn't want to. I've been angry, furious really, ever since I found out what happened. I worked hard for that promotion, I played by the rules, and I lost to someone who didn't, and it crushed me. Not just because I lost, but because it was you. I trusted you. I looked up to you. I admired how composed you always were, how kind. That's what made it worse. But I've had time to think. And I've read the internal reports. I heard what Jeremy told HR, and I realized something. You didn't sabotage me because you didn't believe in me. You helped him because you believed in something else. I'm not writing to excuse it, but I am writing to say I understand it. And even if I don't forgive you yet, I hope one day I will." Elise sat in stunned silence, the words settling deep inside her like a quiet snowfall. It wasn't absolution, but it was something else. Honesty. Grace. She replied simply, "Thank you for saying this. I've never regretted something more, and I've never been more sorry. I hope someday I can earn back what I lost. Not just the job, but the kind of trust people like you gave me without question. Wishing you everything good. Elise." That night, Elise journaled again. Her pen moved slowly, carefully. The truth hurts, but hiding from it hurts more. I wanted to believe I could help without hurting anyone, but life isn't that clean. I can't change what I did, but I can choose what I do next. She had spent weeks buried in shame, trapped in the echoes of what she had lost. But now, something inside her was shifting. The truth was out, and with it came space to breathe, space to rebuild. Not her reputation, Not yet. But herself. Elise had always believed that identity came from what you did, from the job title on your email signature, the lanyard around your neck, the elevator that opened to the 35th floor every morning. But in the quiet days that followed her fall, she discovered something else. Without the suit, without the nameplate, without the calendar full of meetings. Who was she? She had no answer at first. There were days when she stayed in pajamas until noon, moving between the couch and her bed like a ghost. There were nights when the silence in her apartment was so thick, she left the TV on for background noise, just to feel something that resembled life. But slowly, she began to wake up differently. Not with panic, not with guilt, with purpose, small, soft, and almost unnoticeable at first. She started with the bookstore down the block. It was independent, run by a retired couple who had turned their shared love of literature into a charming little place filled with overstuffed shelves and handwritten staff pics. Elise walked in one Wednesday morning, unsure what she was even looking for. The woman behind the counter, Ellen, smiled without expectation. "Can I help you find something?" Elise hesitated. "Actually, I'm just looking." And she was. Not just for a book, but for something to anchor herself to. She left with a novel about resilience, and the next day she came back for another. Ellen remembered her name. A week later, she asked if they were hiring part-time. They were. It wasn't glamorous. She alphabetized returns, sorted shipping invoices, recommended books to teenagers who didn't know what they liked yet. She made coffee runs for the owner and helped restock shelves that hadn't been touched in months. But it felt good, honest, simple. For the first time in years, Elise wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't proving herself. She was just being kind, present, steady. And in the quiet of that bookstore, something inside her began to mend. One afternoon, as she was wiping down a display table, Ellen approached her with a knowing look. "You ever think about writing?" she asked. Elise blinked. "Writing?" "You carry yourself like someone who's holding a story." Elise smiled faintly. "I think I've just been holding on." Ellen chuckled. Same thing sometimes. That night, Elise pulled out her old laptop, the one she hadn't opened since her last day at Beckett and Stroud. She created a new document and typed a title. "Kindness Misplaced: How I Lost My Job Doing the Right Thing the Wrong Way." It wasn't polished. It wasn't even coherent. But she wrote for 2 hours without stopping. The truth poured out of her like water through a broken dam. Not just the facts, but the feelings, the fear, the shame, the ache of being misunderstood, the quiet guilt that had taken root in her bones. She wrote until her fingers ached. And when she stopped, she felt lighter. Days passed. She returned to the manuscript again and again. It wasn't meant to be published. It wasn't meant for anyone but herself. But the process of writing brought clarity. For so long, she had defined herself by what she'd done, by the mistake, by the firing. But as she put words to paper, she saw herself more fully, for who she was in that moment. Someone who had acted from the heart, made a poor decision, and was now choosing to learn from it. She wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. One evening, as she was shelving a new arrival, a familiar voice echoed from the entrance. "Elise?" She turned. It was Alyssa. They hadn't seen each other since the email exchange. Her heart thudded in her chest, unsure how to respond. But Alyssa smiled gently. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." Elise nodded. "Of course. It's good to see you." They stood in an awkward pause. Then Alyssa gestured toward the shelves. "So, this is the new chapter?" Elise gave a half laugh. "Something like that." Alyssa wandered through the store, picking up a book here and there. When she returned to the counter, she had a copy of a memoir in her hand. "I've been thinking about writing one myself," she said, "about ambition and grace and what it means to lose something that matters." Elise looked at her, surprised. "I'm not there yet," Alyssa added, "but maybe one day." She paused. "And for what it's worth, I meant what I wrote. I still don't agree with what happened, but I see you more clearly now, and I hope you're okay." Elise smiled, warm and genuine. "I am, or getting there, at least." Alyssa nodded. "Good." Then, with a small wave, she left. Elise stood for a long time, watching the door after she'd gone. That night, she added a final line to her journal. "After the fall, I didn't land where I expected. But maybe that's the point." Winter came slowly to the city, layering the sidewalks with frost and filling the bookstore with the scent of cinnamon candles and pine-scented floor cleaner. Elise had never loved winter before, but now it suited her. Something about the stillness, the way the world slowed down and invited reflection. She had fallen into a rhythm, not the relentless pace of corporate life, but something more human. Mornings with coffee and quiet reading, afternoons spent unpacking boxes and chatting with customers, evenings writing or journaling by lamplight. Her days were smaller now, but they felt fuller somehow. And in the silence between tasks, she learned. She learned that value wasn't tied to salary or business cards, that success didn't have to be loud, that peace was something you built, not something you chased. Most importantly, she learned how to forgive herself. It didn't come all at once. At first, it was just a little less ache in her chest when she thought of Alyssa. A little less shame when she remembered the moment she deleted those numbers from the file. She stopped rewriting the past in her mind, stopped imagining alternate choices that could have saved her from the fallout. Instead, she started accepting that this was the story, and that maybe it wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it was a turning point. One Monday morning, Ellen handed her a cream-colored envelope with no return address. "This came for you." Elise opened it cautiously. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy linen paper. "Dear Elise, I'm not sure if you'll want to hear from me. I was one of the silent ones, the ones who watched what happened and said nothing. I never believed the worst, but I didn't speak up either. I saw how they treated you, and I saw how you left with your head high. Last week I heard you were working here now, and something about that gave me hope. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry I wasn't braver, and I'm glad you are." Monsieur Elise stared at the letter, her throat tightening. She didn't recognize the signature, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had cared enough to say what most people never would, to acknowledge her, not just as a mistake, but as a person who had tried. Later that week, she received an email from a local community college. The bookstore owner had submitted her name to speak at an ethics and leadership workshop for students interested in business careers. At first, Elise laughed. Me? A speaker on ethics? But Ellen had smiled and said, "Who better than someone who's lived the consequences of a hard choice?" So, she said yes. The lecture hall was smaller than she imagined. 20 students, a few faculty members, and a microphone that kept squealing no matter how the tech adjusted it. Elise stood at the podium, heart pounding, the same way it had the day she was fired. But this time it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was clarity. She began. "I used to think that integrity meant never making mistakes, that ethics were black and white rules you followed to stay safe, but I've learned that it's more complicated than that." She told them everything. Not the polished version, but the real one. How it felt to be asked for help. How easy it was to justify the small choices. How quickly trust can vanish. And how long it takes to rebuild it, not with others, but with yourself. One student raised his hand at the end. "If you could go back, would you do it all differently?" Elise paused. I'd still help him, she said. But I'd do it openly, honestly. I'd ask for permission instead of forgiveness. And I'd accept that sometimes the right thing doesn't have to be hidden to be kind. The room was silent. Then came the applause. Soft, respectful. Not for a hero, but for a human being. That night, Elise walked home through the snow. The city was lit in gold and silver from shop windows. Her breath curled in the air like steam. She stopped at a bench near the bookstore, the same bench where she had once sat in shame after losing everything. Now, she sat in peace. Across the street, people hurried by, rushing to deadlines, to dinner reservations, to trains. Elise no longer felt like she had fallen behind. She was just walking a different path. And for the first time, she didn't want to go back to who she had been. Back home, she opened her manuscript. The story was longer now, fuller. It wasn't just about her mistake anymore. It was about what she had learned. She changed the title. Grace After the Fall. And beneath it she wrote, "This is not a story of failure. It's a story of becoming." The snow was melting now. Patches of pavement peeked through the once white sidewalks, and the city seemed to exhale a quiet sigh of relief. Winter was ending, and so was something else, something that had lived inside Elise for months. The grief, the guilt, the weight of being undone. She wasn't the same woman who had walked out of Beckett and Stroud with a cardboard box and a broken heart. That woman had believed her future ended the day she was fired. But now Elise was beginning to understand that endings could be entrances, that when something falls apart, it's not the collapse that defines you, it's what you build from the pieces. The bookstore was busier now. Spring brought in tourists, college students on break, and weekend wanderers in search of stories. Elise had become a quiet fixture there. People knew her name, trusted her recommendations, asked her what she was reading, and left with more than they expected. One Saturday afternoon, as she was restocking a display, Ellen approached with a curious smile. "You've got a visitor." Elise turned. Standing by the front door, looking slightly out of place in his tailored coat, was Dale Stroud. She froze. Of all the people she thought she might see again, he wasn't one of them. Ellen, sensing the tension, stepped away. Elise took a breath and walked toward him. "Mr. Stroud," she said cautiously. "Dale, please," he replied, his voice softer than she remembered. "I hope it's okay I stopped by." She nodded slowly. "I wasn't expecting you." He looked around the store. "It's lovely. And peaceful." "It is," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Why are you here?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I've been thinking about you, about what happened, and about what we didn't give you. A real chance to speak." Elise tilted her head slightly, unsure if she wanted this conversation. "You had every right to fire me," she said evenly. "I crossed a line." "You did," he agreed. "But the truth is, the system you operated in didn't leave much space for compassion, or gray areas, and that's a failure on our part too." She blinked, taken aback. He continued, "What you did was wrong, but it wasn't malicious, and the way you've handled yourself since, well, it speaks volumes." There was a pause. Then he added, "We've started offering ethics workshops for new hires, case studies, conversations about real-life dilemmas. One of them is based on your story, anonymously, of course." Elise let out a small, incredulous laugh. "I'm a cautionary tale now?" "More like a catalyst," he said with a smile. They stood there for a moment, the past heavy, but not crushing between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," Dale added. "But I do hope you know, what you did mattered. Maybe not in the way you hoped, but still." Elise nodded. I've made peace with it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim, familiar object, a printed manuscript. I read this, he said. A friend forwarded it to me. I wasn't sure if it was really you until I finished the last page. Her heart skipped. He held it out. It's beautiful, honest, and I think more people need to read it. She took the copy from him, her fingers brushing the familiar pages. She hadn't realized it had made it beyond the small writing group she had submitted it to online. I was never sure it deserved to be published, she admitted. I am, he said. Let me help you. She looked up at him, her old boss, the man who had once sat across from her in judgment, and now offered something else entirely. Not redemption, not rescue, but recognition. A month later, Elise sat in a small cafe with a literary agent who had read her manuscript and wanted to represent her. The story, she said, was raw, brave, timely, and there was a market for that kind of vulnerability. It's not just about your mistake, the agent said. It's about the recovery. That's the part readers are hungry for. The becoming. Elise smiled. She liked that word. When the book was published 6 months later, it carried a new title. Grace After the Fall, a true story of mistakes, mercy, and moving forward. It didn't become a bestseller overnight, but it found its way into hands that needed it. A woman sent her a letter saying she read it in a hospital waiting room and wept. A young college graduate messaged her on social media to say it gave him the courage to leave a toxic job. And once, a former Beckett and Stroud intern wrote, "You made me realize that being kind doesn't mean being perfect." That was enough. On the anniversary of her termination, Elise took herself out to dinner. Alone, but not lonely. She ordered dessert first, just because she could. And as she sat by the window, watching the soft lights of the city blink to life, she pulled out her journal one last time. She wrote, I am not my job. I am not my failure. I am not who I was before the fall. I am who I chose to become after. Then she closed the journal and left it behind, on the table, for someone else to find. Because her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever stumbled, fallen, and dared to rise again. If you made it this far, leave a comment about what you thought of the story and give it a rating from 0 to 10. Thank you very much.